Okay, doing D.H. Lawrence's The Rockinghorse winner today. Maybe a little bit about D.H. Lawrence. Won't go too far. We're just doing a short story here. But Lawrence was sort of a interesting figure. I mean, a great writer, British writer. And kind of, maybe the thing to keep in mind about it, he sort of bridges that gap sort of between the 19th century European writers and the modernists coming like Kafka and people like that we read earlier. And very interested in the psychological life of his characters. Often very interested in erotic issues, especially, and it was especially taken with the two intellectual giants of his day, which were Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud, who we'll get back to in a little bit. But Rocking Horse Winter is a kind of a dark fairy tale, right? And it begins, that way. There's sort of a once upon a time there was a woman who couldn't love her children, right? And it's everyone, within that paragraph, that opening paragraph goes on to explain that sort of everyone else assumed that they were as happy a family as could be. They appeared that way from the outside, and only she and her children knew the truth. They saw it in each other's eyes. Now, I mean, that is quite an opening, and we are going to, we have a young man in this story, and the child, the son, right, who's trying to. Paul, he's trying to get his mother's love, essentially, right? So again, there's a Sigmund Freud was some there's and here the things to keep in mind. Freud, who's certainly gone well out of fashion these days, much of it with good reason. I do think there's some certain aspects of Freudianism, for example, the entire concept of sublimation, and it's certain psychological wounds, if not dealt with, kind of live in you and kind of come out in some sort of a neurotic behavior, which can be as inconsequential as maybe biting your nails or something, and as consequential as a full blown sort of addiction or something, or a violent pathology or something. I think that may still sort of hold up at least a little bit to scrutiny, and he is like the godfather of talk therapy and psychology. However, again, the Oedipal complex and things like that. And the Oedipal complex essentially often misunderstood as, that all sons want to sleep with their mothers. And that's not really, I don't think, what he meant. It essentially is that the son and the husband, that son sort of views the father as a competitor for the mother's love. Is where that comes from, and maybe we don't even need to go. But this is an unloved, as stated right off the bat. Right, we have an unloved child here, and boy, if you're really paying attention to this story, it is hard not to have your heart not to go out to young Paul here with somebody that gets everything he does is to try to get his mother's love and to try to earn that love, and then we get into the second again intellectual giant, which would be the Karl Marx. And Marx, who's essential, did all of economics, modern economics is this sort of a constant sort of a battle between the capitalists and labor, and the men who sort of own the factories, so to speak, are always trying to get as much of the money as possible and use the people to give the people as little as possible. And there's always this sort of wrestling match, and that's people start to sort of gauge themselves and really the social hierarchy, which is true. And by the way, that's still Marx got a lot right. I wouldn't. I don't know that it's a great idea to base your the organizing principle of a major society upon Marxism. That seems not to have worked out. It led to many millions of people dying. But that he did point out a lot of correct things, and essentially that's it's the commoditization of everything in Marx's view in a capitalist society. That once you have a capitalist society, everything is sort of it overwhelms everything else, and certainly this story is sort of written that way, and that one's status is attached to how much money one has, and that it even replaces things like it replaces God in some ways. Capital does. And again, there's you can make a case for that. I mean, again, before capitalism, tallest buildings in the world were cathedrals, right? These sort of remarkable and gorgeous sort of homage, architectural homages to the deity, right, and to God Himself. And since then, nowadays, the tallest buildings are homages to capitalism, right? They're office buildings. So, as Lawrence is sort of writing this story, he's seeing sort of that the pursuit of monetary status and socioeconomic status has sort of replaced the old sort of kin ties and thinking has overtaken the importance of family and community and kinship and even tribal kinship, and all that's been sort of abstracted sort of out to one's place in the economic sphere, and you do see that and these say, and again, the eroticism of Freud and the capitalist critique of Marx is constantly kind of getting intertwined in really interesting ways in this story. And the first thing we get is this young boy again who is an unloved child and wants, desperate to get his mother's love. Keeps hearing, but again, this is told as a kind of dark fairy tale. That really does begin with that once upon a time sort of intro, and he hears voices in this house, almost like it's haunted. And what a remarkable metaphor, I think, for Lawrence to come up with that, because children, again, they may not understand in a literal and logical sense what parents fight about, but boy, they do sort of absorb it, and they absorb, and they're intuitive, and they get somehow the sort of unarticulated emotional heft of the thing that's being argued about, right? And this woman is disappointed in her husband, who's not made the grades, is not made very much money, and they were kind of born into a wealthy family, and they've become the sort of poor ones. The mother is not at all happy with this, and she's like, well, what, and the voices keep whispering in the house, we need more money, we need more money, we need more money. And again, just a terrific invention, really, by Lawrence to come up with that, because that would be almost what this kid would dream up, like sort of in his head. I'm sure he's hearing bits and snatches of arguments, down in the kitchen while he's lying awake in bed at night and things like that. And this is, he's kind of, he's taking this tension that is kind of wrecking his family and kind of oppressing it and keeping it from being the family every kid wants, and kind of transmogrifying that somehow right into a sort of a literal voice, almost poltergeists or something, the ghosts in the house saying we need more money, right? And the mother at one point he asks, with the bride, she's like, well, we have no money. She's complaining about that, and he's, well, why don't we? Because we're unlucky. And the word luck, which again has connotations to earning money, and again, the father is sort of emasculated here, and we get very little of him. The only scene he's really in, he's getting a drink downstairs when they come home at night. But he's like, well, aren't you lucky, mother? And she's like, no, I can't be. I married your father. Not a real healthy thing to say to your child. And the implication of the father is lucky, and again, luck often, again, his uncle will come into this later, and is his uncle ever the kind of uncle, right? When Paul's still very, very young boy, he's 10, 11 years, maybe 12 years old, I don't know, but he's not 16 or 18 where he'd be dating girls, and if he was 16 or 18, you think that this uncle of his would be the exact kind of uncle to think, did you get lucky tonight, when he was out on a date or something, and so luck luck is often it also has a very sort of sexual and erotic sort of undertones too. So it's got both in this. And you think, well, I'm lucky, mother, and she sort of giggles at him. She's like, oh well, good for you. And she's really isn't taking him seriously at all, and he goes out sort of determined, this little kid, right, to prove that he's lucky. And there's a gardener who sort of works, or sort of just a house, a young man, old, I think got wounded in the war or something, who works for this family, taking care of they still have the house, sort of house rich, cash poor a little bit, but anyway, the kid who takes care of the grounds and things, and he likes to bet on the horses, tells the young Paul about him, and then Paul starts riding his rocking horse in a wild sort of fashion, and while he's doing this, he would put himself into a kind of just through the exertion and going back and forth so hard and so fast, he would kind of almost get into this sort of a mind-altered sort of state, as if you really, or almost a runner's high kind of thing, maybe a little bit, or a real strenuous workout. But again, if you go back and reread that section and see the way it's written, it is something to behold. Because Lawrence, again, he writes about, you hear the springs creaking back and forth. The motion he's making is very much, like the physical act of human sex. He's going back and forth on his horse. He frightens his sister. The young girls get scared of him when he's like that, and kind of and kind of leave the room. And his nanny sort of looking at him sort of side-eyed too, and not quite sure what he's doing. And there definitely seems to be doing it with a purpose. And his eyes glaze over, right? And again, there's just it's so many of the way his rocking horse riding is described so sexually. It's obvious. But he also, but he would get to a certain point, and the climax of these little horse rides, these little rocking horse rides of his, would be Daffodil. And Daffodil would be the name of a horse that would be a 10-to-1 long shot or something. And he starts putting bets in with the young man who works there, and he wins. And then he wins again, and then he starts betting like I think he only leaves himself 10%, bets 90% of his winnings. So it isn't long before he's got his little kids built up $1,000 in this would be like at least 20,000 or something, 25,000 or something today. So it's a lot of money he's making. And his mother continues though to complain about being broke, and he sees how stressed and how inferior she feels, and how uptight she is about it. And so he actually, what his uncle hears about it. Of course, his uncle is one of those kinds of uncles. He's like, well, hell, let's do it. He gets in on it too. But his uncle also helps him arrange for a stipend, sort of for his mom, $1,000 a year, which again would be easily 25 grand or something, or maybe more in today's 2020 American dollars, and it should have taken care of her problems. But the woman's a bit of a spendthrift, and it doesn't. She just goes out and buys a bunch of new furniture and is back to complaining, in no time. So again, this kid is working, trying to, fix things for his mother. It's actually succeeding, by the way, and and having to do all this without her even knowing. He just wants to be able to see the effect, that he's taking care of his mom, and he gets she's just as miserable as ever, and now those voices that we need more money are like a chorus of frogs, I think is how it's described, that it's getting louder and louder, and eventually we do get to a point later where and the mother actually starts to, and oddly enough though, it does work a bit, and eventually it does work at the end of the day, although poor Paul has to pay for it with his life. But the mother does become very concerned, and a mother who hadn't been much concerned at all but I was really starting to get concerned about how obsessed he's becoming over the horses in general and his rocking horse and the way he rides that thing like a maniac. And she wants him to go. He needs to maybe go stay with some relatives for a while and out on the shore. He talks her into letting her stay for the whatever the big the tournament horse tournament that's coming up. And anyway, the night of it, which is going to be the night he can maybe take care of all their debts and all their money problems. His mom and dad are out to a dinner that evening, and he's boom, jumps up on the rocking horse and starts to go. And his mother, while she's at a dinner, she's actually starting to worry about her son. And again, the mother who couldn't love her children is now starting to sort of, it seems like a sort of mother's intuition is sort of growing inside of her. So his will does seem to be causing something to happen in his mother's frozen heart. And she comes home a bit early. She calls home because she's so worried about it. So this is legit. This concern she has for him, and she kind of creeps up to his room, and she gets this sort of weird feeling, right? And she kind of puts her ear to the door, and she can hear the springs going back and forth. And again, this is so much like the mother walking in on the teenage son, either masturbating or in there with a girl or something, right? And she's sort of like filled with a kind of sort of shock, and not quite. And she opens the door and she sees, and again, his face, which again the eyes glazed over, everything is sort of very eroticized in the description of the horse, and he's just going kind of back and forth, in a frenzy, but he's also on he's been having trouble. He's having more and more trouble getting the right names, and this is the biggest race of them all. And finally, it's I forget the name of the last winning horse. I think I wrote it down here somewhere. Sorry, damn it. It doesn't matter. He cries out the name of the horse. Sorry, that was a brick on my part. Of the winning horse, and basically just collapses, and a few days later dies. And he got it right. And so he does, at the end of the day, take care of his mom and his family, but pays the sort of ultimate price to do with it in order to do it. And again, we see Lawrence here weaving just a brilliant a kind of perfectly architectured tale. Right, and a lot of social commentary on the rising capitalist society in Britain at the time, and how it was sort of overtaking the old sort of tribal and kinship, sort of, maybe tribal's a little much, but the old social structures, and sort of investigating some of those the deeper sort of Freudian things as well. Again, that's D.H. Lawrence, Rockinghorse winner.